Hi, second grade. Let's finish the wump world. If you recall, we left off when the wumps had ruined, not the wumps, the pollutions had ruined Wump World. And instead of cleaning it up, they went to the boss who said, "We've got to find a new world, a better one. That's your job, men. So let's get going." And there they go. "Righto, Chief," barked the men, and within 15 minutes they were at the spaceport aboard their spaceships. Then zaroosh, zaroosh, zaroosh! The men took off in 3 directions, and in seconds they were zooming about in outer space at 7,000 miles an hour. That's very fast. Days passed with no word from the outer spacemen. After waiting a week, the world chief flew into a rage. "Blast it all!" he bellowed. "What's keeping those blithering bubbleheads?" It's not a very nice thing to say, is it? Then one Monday morning, out of the dark, smudgy sky swooshed one of the spaceships. As the ship touched down, the man hopped out shouting, "I've done it! I've done it! I have found a new world, a bigger and a better world." "Nice going, lad," cried the world chief, and the crowd gathered at the spaceport to give hang on. The crowd gathered at the spaceport gave their hero one great rousing cheer, which ended in a fit of sneezing. Because when there's all that pollution, you can't cheer. You can't really even talk very well after a while. In no time, the great news was sent flashing around the world over radio and TV, warning all pollutions to be packed and ready to go within 24 hours. If your parents said to you, "Pack up, we're moving in 24 hours, could you get your house packed?" I couldn't. These guys can. At dawn, the next day, the entire population swarmed into the Space Center and crowded aboard the giant spaceships. So they're leaving. That's good. Or is it? After double checking to make sure all the pollutions were accounted for, the world chief gave the signal for blast off. With a thunderous roar, the giant ships shot off the ground. Kazoom! Up and away through the smoke-blackened sky, and were gone. And at long last, peace and quiet settled over the Wump World. The sudden silence came as a shock to the Wumps. They could hardly believe their ears. Still, they wanted to take no chances, and so they remained in their caverns with their ears cocked for the slightest sound. After all that noise and mess, they're going to be pretty careful before they go back up top again. After a long, long silence, they decided it was time to go. And led by the biggest wump, they crept up the tunnel to the cave entrance to find it covered by a crust of cement. With one powerful push of his snout, the biggest wump bumped his way through. And then one by one, the wumps waddled out onto a freeway and gaped in wide-eyed amazement. They had feared something awful was happening to their world, but this was much more than they could have imagined. They were staggered by the size of the huge buildings, with walls and walls of windows looming up on every side, and the broad layers of hard, flat crust covering the earth, which felt strangely cold to their feet. There was no sign of any tree or tuft of grass. Even the sky was gone. And the wumps wondered if there was anything left for them. At least they must find out. They wandered the freeways for miles, only to find more and more buildings with endless heaps of wreckage and rubble. For all they could see, their world was completely ruined. Footsore and weary, the wumps were about to give up and head back for their cave, when the biggest wump let out a joyful "Wump!" What do you think he has seen? Maybe a little patch of grass? Maybe a bumbershoot tree? Just ahead of them was a grassy meadow with a clump of bumbershoot trees, all that was left of their wonderful world. Wump wumping for joy, the wumps went bounding off the freeway out onto the meadow. Pretty soon the hungry wumps were munching away on the tall, tender grass. Now there was new hope for the wumps. But this is all that they have, right? They used to have an entire little world. They used to have so many fields and so many trees and so many lakes. And now they just have one little spot left. But at least it does give them some hope, doesn't it? In time, the murky skies would clear up and the rains would wash the scum from the rivers and lakes. The tall buildings would come tumbling down and the freeways would crumble away. And in time, the green growth would wind its way up through the rubble. But the wump world would never be the same. So that's a very interesting thought. When people leave buildings and even pavement behind, cracks appear and nature does push through the cracks. Have you ever seen that? Have you ever seen a little flower coming through a crack in a sidewalk or something where it's not really supposed to be? Nature is pretty unstoppable. Nature tries to take over again. Have you ever seen a house? There's a couple houses in Bethel that are sort of falling down, and nature is coming all around them. Trees are kind of choking the house in the middle. But pieces of that house will always be there. It won't all disappear. So we have to be very careful about our world and keep some green spaces and not build everything into big cities and not trash our beautiful world. Right? Right. See you next week.